They seized his father's ranch for debt and gave him cursed ground in exchange, red clay that steamed in winter, geysers that hissed like demons, land so feared the Comanche called it, the breathing wound. What they didn't know was that heat rising from hell could keep a man alive when the frontier tried to kill him. The dust on Main Street tasted like ash. Mateo stood outside the mercantile, his father's saddle and a worn bundle at his feet. The town council formed a half-circle around him. Judge Harrow held the paper like it burned his fingers. Mateo Vega. For debts outstanding to the Esperanza Land Trust, your family ranch is hereby seized. Harrow's voice carried across the street. Windows opened. Faces appeared. You are granted. In compensation, Lot 47. The sulfur flats beyond Widow's Ridge. The words hit like a Colt's hammer falling on an empty chamber. Mateo's jaw tightened. His father had built that ranch with bleeding hands. 3 generations of Vega sweat in that soil. Now gone. Traded for cursed ground. The sulfur lands. Old Miguel crossed himself from the boardwalk. Dios mío. You send him to hell itself. The flats were legend. Red clay that steamed in winter. Geysers that hissed poison. Ground so hot it burned through boot leather. Even coyotes circled wide. The Comanche called it the breathing wound. White men called it the devil's country. Mateo picked up his saddle. The leather was cracked but honest. His father's initials were burned into the cantle. He slung it over his shoulder, felt its familiar weight settle against his spine. There's more. Harrow folded the paper. His eyes wouldn't meet Mateo's. First freeze comes in 3 days. Maybe 4. After that, the pass closes. You go now, or you don't go at all. The crowd shifted. Someone coughed. The mercantile owner, Brennan, stepped forward. His belly strained against his vest. Boy, that road in winter is a death trap. Ice turns the canyon into a killing floor. You'll never make it back out. Mateo looked at him. Brennan had extended the credit. Brennan had called the debt. Brennan stood there now with pity painted on his face like cheap whitewash. Then I won't come back. Mateo's voice was flat. He turned toward his horse, tied at the rail. The mare was old but steady. She'd carry him one more time. Mateo. Sheriff Dawson moved closer. His hand rested on his gun belt, not threatening, just habit. Those lands are cursed. For a reason. The air itself is poison. Nothing grows. Nothing lives. This is exile wearing a land grant's face. Better than a noose. Mateo checked the saddle cinch. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. Load the bundle. Secure the bedroll. Check the canteen. The motions kept his mind from the hole opening in his chest. The sky was already changing. Gray clouds massed over the western peaks. The wind carried the smell of coming snow. 3 days. Maybe 4. Then the frontier would close like a fist, and the sulfur lands would become his tomb or his kingdom. Mateo swung into the saddle. The mare shifted beneath him, sensing his tension. He looked back once at Esperanza. At the false-fronted buildings. At the people who'd watched his family bleed for this town. At the judge who'd signed away his birthright with a clean conscience. 3 days, Brennan called after him. After that, you're on your own. No rescue. No supplies. The kerosene won't last a week in that cold, and the sulfur will eat through anything metal. Mateo touched his hat brim. Not a goodbye. An acknowledgement. He turned the mare west, toward the mountains, toward the cursed lands, toward whatever waited in the steam and stone. Behind him, Esperanza faded into dust and memory. Ahead, the sulfur flats waited like an open grave. And somewhere between exile and death, Mateo Vega rode toward the only future they'd left him. The wind picked up. The first snowflakes began to fall. The pass narrowed to a knife edge. Rock walls pressed close on both sides. The mare's hooves rang against stone, each step echoing like a countdown. Mateo pulled his collar tight against the wind. Snow fell harder now. Fat flakes that stuck to his shoulders and melted into his shirt. The sulfur smell hit him before he saw the flats. Sharp. Acrid. Like matches struck in a closed room. The mare balked, ears flat. Mateo urged her forward with his knees. No choice now. The pass behind them was already filling with snow. Forward or freeze. The land opened up like a wound. Red clay stretched to the horizon, cracked and broken. Steam rose from fissures in the ground, white columns that twisted in the wind. The air shimmered with heat even as snow fell around him. Mateo dismounted. The ground was warm beneath his boots. Not burning. Just warm. Like sun-baked stone in summer. He walked to the nearest fissure. Steam billowed up, carrying that sulfur stench. But underneath it, something else. Mineral. Clean. He knelt, careful, and held his hand over the vent. Heat rolled over his palm. Steady. Constant. His breath caught. This wasn't poison. This was power. A geyser erupted 50 yards away. Water shot 20 feet into the air, then fell back in a cascade. Mateo moved toward it, leading the mare. The pool at its base was milky white, crusted with yellow mineral deposits. He touched the water. Hot. Too hot. But the runoff stream that flowed away from it cooled as it traveled. He followed it downstream. 30 yards from the geyser, the water ran clear. He cupped his hand, brought it to his lips. Tasted. Mineral tang, but clean. Pure. He drank again, deeper. The town had called this poison. The town had lied. Or the town had never looked close enough to see the truth. Mateo surveyed the flats with new eyes. 3 major geysers visible from here. Dozens of smaller vents. Steam rising everywhere. The ground warm enough to melt snow on contact. He could survive the winter here. Maybe. If he built smart. If he worked fast. If his supplies lasted long enough to establish something permanent. He unpacked his bundle. 2 weeks of hardtack and jerky. A bag of cornmeal. Salt. 1 blanket. A length of rope. His father's hunting knife. A small tin of kerosene for the lamp. Tools for building, hammer, nails, a hand saw. Seeds he bought with his last coins. Carrots. Potatoes. Beans. Foolish, the mercantile owner had said. Nothing grows in cursed ground. But this ground wasn't cursed. It was warm. It had water. It had heat rising from the earth itself like a gift. The town's fear had been his inheritance. Their superstition, his salvation. Mateo felt something crack open in his chest. Not hope. Not yet. But possibility. He chose a spot between 2 stable vents. The ground here was level, the steam consistent. He could build a shelter. Dig trenches to channel the heat. Create beds of warm stone for planting. Use the condensed steam for drinking water. The system formed in his mind like a blueprint. It would work. It had to work. The wind picked up. Snow swirled across the red clay, melting where it touched the warm ground. Mateo looked back toward the pass. already invisible behind the storm. The frontier had closed behind him. Esperanza was gone. The ranch was gone. Everything he'd known was buried under snow and distance. He was alone in the devil's country with 2 weeks of food and a gamble that heat and water could keep him alive. The mare nickered softly. Mateo stroked her neck. "Just us now, girl. Just us and the steam." He pulled his saddle off her back and began to build. The first night was coming fast, and the temperature was dropping. He had no shelter. No fire. Only the warm ground beneath his feet and the knowledge that everyone who'd exiled him had been wrong about this place. But being right wouldn't matter if he froze before he could prove it. The mare's hooves echoed on Main Street like a funeral drum. Mateo rode into Esperanza at noon, when the sun was high and every eye could see him. Faces appeared in windows. Conversation stopped. He'd been gone 2 weeks. They'd expected him dead. The surprise on their faces was almost worth the ride back. He tied the mare outside Brennan's mercantile. His father's saddle was still on her back, but lighter now. He'd stripped everything he could spare. The silver conchos. The decorative stitching. The leather saddlebags. All of it bundled in his arms like an offering to men who'd already taken everything. The mercantile door creaked. Brennan looked up from his ledger. His eyes widened, then narrowed. "Vega. Thought the sulfur would have claimed you by now." Mateo dropped the bundle on the counter. "Need seeds. Salt. Nails if you've got them." Brennan poked at the leather goods with one finger. "This is all you brought?" "It's all I've got." The store owner picked up a saddlebag, examined the stitching. "Might get you a pound of salt. Maybe some cornmeal. I need bean seeds. Carrot. Potato if you've got it." Brennan laughed. Short. Sharp. Like a cold spark. "Seeds? Boy, what are you planning to do with seeds in the sulfur flats?" Mateo met his eyes. "Plant them." The door opened behind him. Sheriff Dawson stepped in, followed by 3 ranch hands from the broken spur. The mercantile suddenly felt smaller. Crowded. Mateo kept his hands visible, away from his belt. "Heard you were back," Dawson said. His voice was casual, but his hand rested on his gun. "Didn't expect that. Just here for supplies." "In the devil's country?" One of the ranch hands spat tobacco juice into a brass spittoon. "What are you eating, boy? Sulfur and steam?" Mateo turned back to Brennan. "The geysers create heat. Constant heat. The ground stays warm even when it snows. I can use that. Build growing beds. Channel the steam for water." Silence. Then laughter. It started with the ranch hand and spread like wildfire. Brennan's belly shook. Dawson's mouth twitched. Even the old clerk in the corner cracked a smile. "You're gonna farm the sulfur flats?" Brennan wiped his eyes. "Boy, you've gone mad. That heat'll cook you alive. The fumes'll poison your lungs. You'll be dead before Christmas. The water's clean in the upper springs. The heat's steady. I've already built what?" The ranch hand stepped closer. "A coffin? That's all you're building out there. Those lands are cursed for a reason. The Comanche wouldn't even camp there. You think you're smarter than them?" Mateo's jaw tightened. He'd known this would happen. Known they'd mock him. But hearing it, standing in this room with their laughter echoing off the walls, made something cold settle in his gut. "I need the seeds." Brennan shook his head. "Tell you what. I'll give you a bag of beans and some salt. For old time's sake. But you're wasting your time, Vega. That land'll kill you, and these seeds'll rot in poisoned ground. He counted out the supplies. 1 small bag of dried beans. A twist of salt wrapped in paper. A handful of carrot seeds in a cloth pouch. Mateo took them. His last possessions traded for a gambler's chance. You got maybe 3 days before the big freeze hits, Dawson said. His voice had lost its mockery. Now it was just tired. After that, the pass closes for the season. You go back out. There, you're stuck till spring. No rescue. No supplies. Just you and the devil's breath. Mateo gathered his meager supplies. Through the window, he could see the sky. It had been clear when he rode in. Now clouds massed over the western peaks. Dark. Heavy. The kind of clouds that carried blizzards in their bellies. Then I better ride fast. He pushed past them, out. Into the street. The wind had picked up. It smelled like snow and distance. Behind him, through the mercantile window, he saw them watching. Brennan. Dawson. The ranch hands. Their faces said what their mouths didn't, they'd never see him alive again. Mateo swung into the saddle. The mare sensed his urgency, dancing sideways. He turned her west, toward the mountains, toward the sulfur lands, toward the only home he had left. The first snowflakes began to fall. Fat and slow. Beautiful and deadly. 3 days, Dawson had said. Maybe less. The frontier was closing like a trap, and Mateo Vega was riding straight into its jaws with nothing but beans, salt, and the certainty that everyone in Esperanza wanted him to fail. The mare's breath came in white plumes as they crested the final ridge. Below, the sulfur flats spread like a fever dream. Steam rose in twisted columns, backlit by the dying sun. Red clay glowed orange in the last light. Mateo felt the warmth rising even from here, a ghost touch against his frozen cheeks. He dismounted where the ground turned warm beneath the snow. His boots sank into mud that steamed. The mare nickered. Uncertain, but followed when he led her toward the largest geyser. 3 days of work ahead. Maybe 4. Then the blizzard would seal him in until spring. The first trench took 2 days. Mateo swung the pickaxe until his shoulders screamed. The clay was soft near the surface, baked hard underneath. Each strike sent vibrations up his arms, into his teeth. Sweat soaked his shirt despite the cold wind. The sulfur smell clung to his skin like sin. He dug in a line between 2 stable vents. The trench would channel heat, create a corridor of warmth. His hands blistered, then bled, then calloused over. The rhythm became meditation. Swing. Strike. Lift. Swing. Strike. Lift. The pickaxe sang against stone, a lonely bell in the wasteland. Stone walls came next. He gathered rocks from the canyon rim, carried them down in his arms until his back bent. Like an old man's. Each stone had to fit just right. Too loose and the heat would escape. Too tight and the structure would crack when the ground shifted. His father had taught him masonry. Those lessons lived in his hands now, muscle memory older than thought. The walls rose slowly. Knee-high. Waist-high. Chest-high. He built them in a horseshoe around the primary geyser, leaving the opening to the south where the wind was gentlest. Inside this shelter, the temperature stayed above freezing even when snow fell. The mare stood in the protected space, her coat dry for the first time in days. Underground chambers were the hardest. Mateo dug pits near the smaller vents, lined them with flat stones. The steam would rise, hit the cool stone ceiling, condense into water. Droplets would run down channels he carved with his knife, collect in a basin he'd hollowed from a single boulder. The first time it worked, he stood watching water gather, clear and pure, and felt something break loose in his chest. He planted in beds of heated stone. Mixed the red clay with mineral deposits scraped from geyser edges. The soil felt strange in his hands, warm and gritty, nothing like the black earth of his father's ranch. He pressed bean seeds into the ground with his thumb. Covered them gently, whispered prayers he'd learned as a child. Carrot seeds went in rows. Potato eyes in mounds. Each seed was a gamble. Each planting an act of faith. The kerosene lamp burned low as he worked into the night, its yellow light casting long shadows across the stone walls. His shadow moved with him, a dark companion that never spoke. The system worked. Within a week, green shoots pushed through the warm soil. Tiny. Fragile. Impossible. Mateo knelt beside them each morning, touched the leaves with fingers that trembled. Life in the devil's country. Growth in cursed ground. The town had been wrong about everything. But the silence was a living thing. It pressed against his ears until they rang. The wind howled through the canyon, but it wasn't conversation. The geysers hissed and spat, but they weren't company. The mare was warm. Presence, but she couldn't answer when he spoke. He started talking to fill the void. Small things at first. Need to reinforce that wall. Water's running clear today. Beans are coming up strong. His voice sounded strange in the empty air, thin and uncertain, like a man calling into a cave and hearing no echo. The shadows became familiar. The one on the eastern wall was tall and broad-shouldered. His father, maybe. Or the man he wished his father had been. The shadow on the western wall was smaller, quicker. It moved when the lamp flickered, seemed to dance in the corner of his vision. "You think I'm crazy?" Mateo asked the tall shadow one night. His voice cracked on the words. "Maybe I am. Maybe Brennan was right. Maybe the fumes are getting to me." The shadow didn't answer. Just stood there, patient and silent, while the lamp burned. Low and the wind screamed outside. He found himself waiting for the shadows to move. Watching them from the corner of his eye. Sometimes he'd turn quickly, trying to catch them shifting. They never did. But he could swear they were closer than before. More defined. Almost solid in the lamplight. "I built something here," he told them on the 14th night. His hands shook as he poured the last of the kerosene into the lamp. Something real. Something that works. The town said it couldn't be done, but look. He gestured at the green chutes, the stone walls, the condensation chambers. "Look what I made." The shadows watched. Silent. Patient. Waiting. Mateo's laugh came out wrong. Too high. Too sharp. It echoed off the stone walls and came back to him distorted, like someone else's voice. He pressed his palms against his eyes. Until he saw stars. When he looked up, the shadows had multiplied. 5 now. 6. A crowd of silent witnesses in the lamplight. "I'm not alone," he whispered. "I'm not." But his voice shook with the lie, and the shadows leaned closer, and somewhere in the darkness beyond the lamp's reach, Mateo Vega felt his mind begin to fray like old rope under too much weight. The blizzard came like a white wall. One moment Mateo could see the canyon rim, the next it vanished behind curtains of snow that moved like living things. The wind hit with the force of a stampeding horse, knocked him sideways against the stone wall he'd built. Ice crystals stung his face like buckshot, each one a tiny blade that drew blood from his chapped skin. He stumbled toward the shelter, one hand gripping the rope. He'd strung between the walls. The hemp was already crusted with ice, rough against his palm. His fingers had gone numb an hour ago. Now they were just hooks, curved and useless, barely able to hold on. The mare whinnied from inside the horseshoe of stone, her voice high and frightened, almost human. The world became white noise. Wind screaming. Snow hissing against rock. His own breath rasping in his throat like a saw. Through green wood. Mateo pressed his back against the warm stone, felt the heat from the geyser seeping through his coat. Steam rose and froze instantly, creating a fog of ice crystals that hung in the air like ghosts. Then he heard it. A sound that didn't belong to the storm. Thin. Desperate. Almost lost in the howling. A human voice calling for help. Mateo's head snapped up. His heart kicked against his ribs like a colt. Trying to break free. He squinted into the white chaos, saw nothing but snow and more snow, an endless churning void that swallowed everything. The cry came again. Closer now. Or maybe farther. Distance meant nothing in a blizzard. Sound bent and twisted, came from everywhere and nowhere. Mateo pushed away from the wall, took 3 steps into the storm. The wind tried to tear him off his feet. Snow filled his mouth when he opened it to shout back. He spat, tried again. Where are you? His voice disappeared into the white. No echo. No answer. Just the wind's endless scream. He took another step. Then another. The rope in his hand went taut. He'd reached its end. Beyond this point, he'd be untethered. Lost. The sulfur flat stretched for miles in every direction. A man could walk in circles until he froze, die within yards of shelter and never know it. The cry came a third time. Weaker now. Fading. Mateo's hands moved before his mind caught up. He unknotted the rope from his belt, tied it around his waist instead. Pulled it tight until it bit through his coat. If he got lost, maybe he could follow it back. Maybe. He stepped into the void. The world became sensation without sight. Cold that burned. Wind that deafened. Snow that blinded. Mateo walked with his arms outstretched, feeling for obstacles he couldn't see. His boots sank into drifts, stumbled over hidden rocks. The rope played out behind him, a lifeline growing thinner with each step. His lungs ached from breathing frozen air. Each inhale felt like swallowing knives. He almost walked past them. Would have, if his boot hadn't caught on something solid. Mateo fell forward, hands plunging into snow, and touched fabric. Wool. Frozen stiff. He dug frantically, his numb fingers scraping through ice, and found an arm. A shoulder. A face. The man's eyes were closed. His lips blue. Frost clung to his beard like white moss. Mateo's stomach dropped. He knew that beard. Knew the silver star pinned to the coat beneath the snow. Sheriff Dawson. The man who told him he'd never survive. Who'd watched him ride into exile with tired eyes and no mercy. Mateo's hands hovered over the sheriff's chest, feeling for breath. There. Faint. Shallow. But there. He dug deeper. Found 2 more bodies huddled together. One was Brennan, the mercantile owner, his bulk unmistakable even buried in snow. The other was younger, one of the ranch hands who'd laughed when Mateo explained his plan. Their wagon must have overturned. They tried to walk. Made it this far before the storm swallowed them whole. Mateo knelt in the snow, his mind racing. 3 men. Barely alive. The same men who'd exiled him. Who'd mocked him. Who'd expected him dead by now. His supplies were stretched thin already. 3 more mouths meant his food would last maybe a week. Maybe less. The beans were just sprouting. The potatoes wouldn't be ready for months. Saving them could mean starving himself. The wind howled. Snow piled against them. Bodies, already trying to bury them again. Mateo looked back the way he'd come. Couldn't see the rope anymore. Couldn't see anything but white. His sanctuary was out there somewhere. Warm. Safe. His. He could leave them. Walk away. Let the frontier take what it wanted. No one would ever know. Dawson's hand twitched. His lips moved, forming words Mateo couldn't hear. The sheriff's eyes opened, just a crack. Glazed. Unfocused. But aware enough to see Mateo kneeling over him. Aware enough to know who held his life in frozen hands. Something passed between them. Recognition. Understanding. The weight of choices made and consequences owed. Mateo grabbed Dawson under the arms. Hauled him up. The sheriff's head lolled against his shoulder, dead weight and trust. Mateo looped the rope around them both, tied it with shaking hands. Then he reached for Brennan. The store owner was heavier, harder to move. Mateo's back screamed as he dragged him close, wrapped the rope around all three of them. The ranch hand came last. Lighter. Younger. His face was peaceful, like he'd already accepted death. They were bound together now. 4 men on one rope. If Mateo got lost, they'd all die. If the rope broke, they'd all die. If he couldn't find his way back, they'd all die. The mathematics of survival had changed. It wasn't just his life anymore. It was theirs too. The men who'd cast him out. The men who'd laughed. The men who'd wanted him to fail. Mateo stood, the rope cutting into his waist. He couldn't feel his feet anymore. Couldn't feel his hands. But he could feel the rope. He followed it into the white, dragging 3 dying men behind him, and wondered if mercy was just another word for madness. The storm swallowed them whole, and somewhere in that howling void, Mateo Vega carried his enemies toward salvation, knowing that when they woke, they'd see everything he'd built from the ashes of their judgment. The thaw came slowly to the sulfur flats. Ice melted in rivulets that steamed when they touched warm stone, creating a fog that hung low over the terraced beds where green shoots pushed through mineral-rich soil. Mateo stood at the edge of his land, watching the horizon where the road from Esperanza cut through red clay hills. The air smelled different now. Less sulfur, more earth. Spring carried the scent of possibility. On a wind that no longer bit. He saw them coming an hour before they arrived. 5 riders, moving slow, their horses picking careful paths through mud that sucked at hooves. Mateo's hands tightened on the wooden handle of his hoe, knuckles going white against weathered oak. His jaw clenched hard enough to make his teeth ache. He recognized the lead horse. A bay gelding with white stockings. Brennan's mount. The store owner. Dismounted first, his boots squelching in the soft ground. He'd lost weight over the winter. His coat hung loose on shoulders that had once filled doorways. His face was thinner too, carved down to bone and sinew, and when he met Mateo's eyes, something flickered there. Shame, maybe. Or the memory of freezing in a blizzard while the man he'd mocked dug him out of snow. Brennan cleared his throat. The sound was rough, like gravel shifting in a dry creek bed. Mateo. His voice cracked on the name. He tried again. Mr. Vega. We've come to talk. Behind him, the other riders dismounted. Sheriff Dawson moved stiffly, favoring his left leg. The frostbite had taken 2 toes. Mateo had heard about it from a passing trader. The ranch hand who'd laughed at his plans stood silent now, hat in hands, eyes fixed on the ground. Mateo said nothing. Just stood there with the hoe in his hands, dirt under his fingernails, steam rising from the geyser behind him like breath from some sleeping giant. The silence stretched. Grew teeth. Brennan shifted his weight, leather creaking. His hand moved to the saddlebag, slow and deliberate, like approaching a spooked horse. He pulled out a bundle wrapped in oilcloth. Set it on the ground between them. Tools, Brennan said. His voice was quieter now. Almost gentle. Good ones. Steel from back east. Saws, chisels, a new pickaxe. Thought you might. He trailed off. Swallowed hard. Thought you might need them. For what you're building here. The words hung in the air like smoke. Mateo looked at the bundle. Looked at Brennan. Looked at the men who'd stood in the mercantile and called him a madman. Who'd laughed when he explained his plan. Who'd expected him dead by spring. Dawson stepped forward. His limp was pronounced, each step a visible effort. The silver star on his chest caught the morning light, threw it back in sharp angles. The town council met, he said. His voice was steady but his hands trembled slightly, fingers curling and uncurling at his sides. We want to propose a partnership. You've got something here. Something valuable. We can help you expand. Bring supplies. Labor. Make this into something bigger. Mateo's laugh came out harsh. Bitter. It tasted like copper on his tongue, like blood from a split lip. Partnership, he repeated. The word felt foreign in his mouth. Wrong. You mean you want what I built? What you said couldn't be done. He drove the hoe into the ground. The blade sank deep into warm soil with a sound like tearing fabric. Where was this partnership when? You took my father's ranch? When you gave me 3 days to reach cursed ground or die trying? Brennan flinched. The movement was small but visible. A tightening around his eyes. A downward pull at the corners of his mouth. We were wrong, he said. Each word seemed to cost him something. About the land. About you. About. He gestured helplessly at the terraced beds, the stone walls, the condensation chambers that turned steam into pure water. All of it. We were wrong about all of it. The ranch hand finally spoke. His voice was young. Uncertain. You saved our lives. He looked up, met Mateo's eyes. His own were red-rimmed, haunted. You could have left us. Should have left us. We would have. The admission hung between them like a confession. Raw. Honest. Terrible in its simplicity. Mateo felt something shift in his chest. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But recognition. The acknowledgement of truth spoken aloud. He looked past them, toward Esperanza. The town was a smudge on the horizon, small and distant. Once it had been everything. Home. Community. The place where his father was buried and his childhood lived in every dusty street. Now it felt like a memory that belonged to someone else. He turned back to his land. The geysers hissed and spat, their rhythm as familiar as his own heartbeat. The stone walls he'd built with bleeding hands stood solid and true. The green shoots in the heated beds reached toward the sun, impossible life in impossible ground. This was real. This was his. Built from nothing but stubbornness and the refusal to die when dying would have been easier. Your respect came too late, Mateo said quietly. The words weren't angry. Just factual. A statement of truth as plain as sunrise. I don't need your partnership. Don't need your tools or your labor or your council's approval. He pulled the hoe from the ground, soil clinging to the blade. I needed those things when you took my ranch. When you laughed at me. When you sent me here to die. Brennan's face crumpled. The store owner who'd once filled doorways with his bulk and his certainty looked small now. Diminished. "What do you need?" he asked. His voice was barely a whisper. "Tell us. Please. Let us make this right." The desperation in his tone was palpable, thick as the steam that rose from the geysers. Mateo looked at him. At all of them. Men who'd judged him. Exiled him. Expected him to fail. Men whose lives he'd saved anyway, because leaving them to freeze would have made him into something he refused to become. He felt the weight of their expectation. Their hope for redemption. Their need for his forgiveness to absolve their guilt. "I need you to leave," he said. The words were soft but final. "Go back to Esperanza. Tell them what you saw here. Tell them the cursed lands aren't cursed. Tell them whatever you want." He turned away, facing his terraced beds, his stone walls, his home. "But I'm staying here. This is mine. The only thing that never betrayed me was this ground you all feared." He heard them mount up. Heard the creak of leather and the jingle of bridles. Heard Brennan's voice, thick with something that might have been tears. "The tools are yours. No strings. Just. They're yours." Then hoofbeats. Fading. Growing distant. Mateo didn't turn around. Didn't watch them go. He knelt beside his potato bed, pressed his palm against warm soil, and felt the steady pulse of heat rising from deep earth. The frontier had tried to kill him. The town had tried to break him. But here, in the land everyone feared, Mateo Vega had found something they'd never understand. Not partnership. Not community. Not forgiveness. Just the quiet certainty that he'd built a life from steam and stone in his own two hands, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Behind him, the bundle of tools sat in the mud. Untouched. A peace offering he hadn't accepted. Mateo stared at it for a long moment, then looked back at his land, at the impossible green growing in cursed ground, and wondered if refusing their redemption made him free or just alone. The geysers hissed their answer, but the wind carried it away before he could understand.